The Sunday night visitor. Every Sunday night at exactly 11:59 p.m., someone knocked on the Barnards' back door. It was never loud, just 3 soft knocks, like someone polite but impatient. Always 3. Always at the same time. Mr. and Mrs. Barnard had lived in the house for 16 years. It was a quiet neighborhood, mostly older couples, a few children, trimmed lawns and white fences. The kind of place where people waved from their porches and brought casseroles during storms. They noticed the knocking about a year ago. At first, they thought it was a prank. Maybe the neighbor's teenager sneaking around, or a raccoon. But nothing was ever caught on the doorbell camera. And the knocking never happened on any night but Sunday. The first few times, they didn't answer. They lay in bed, listening, wide awake, holding hands in the dark. Then, one night, Mr. Barnard got up. He opened the back door slowly. No one was there. The porch light buzzed softly. The wind moved through the trees, but when he came back inside, he realized the small ceramic dog that sat beside the steps was gone. They both agreed it must have been knocked over, maybe stolen. Kids again. The next Sunday, the knocking came again. 11:59, right on time. 3 knocks. This time, Mrs. Barnard opened the door. Again, no one. But by morning, the welcome mat was gone. After that, they started writing things down. Keeping track. Week 3, the broom from the back wall disappeared. Week 4, one of Mr. Barnard's work boots. Week 5, the wind chimes, even though they were nailed in place. Week 6, a whole box of winter coats from the laundry room. Always after they opened the door. They stopped opening it after the 7th week, but things still went missing. Once, they stayed up all night and kept watch through the kitchen blinds. When the clock turned 11:59, they heard the knocks, 3 of them, soft, steady. But there was no one on the steps. Nothing moved. And yet, in the morning, all of the family photos from the living room had vanished. The frames were still there, just empty. As if no one had ever been in the pictures to begin with, Mr. Barnard asked around the neighborhood. No one else heard anything strange. No one else had lost anything, probably mice, someone said. Or teenagers. You know how they are. But the Barnards stopped inviting people over. They started locking every door, every drawer. They taped cabinets shut. Still, things disappeared. Old birthday cards, Mrs. Barnard's favorite earrings, the dog's leash, a stack of bills, the spare car key. They thought about moving. They packed a few boxes. But they couldn't find their suitcases. Then, one Sunday, the knocks didn't come. They stayed up anyway, tense and tired. The clock turned 11:59. Silence. They didn't speak. They just waited. A few minutes later, the phone rang. Mr. Barnard picked it up. There was no voice, just a sound, something wet and slow, like someone breathing through their teeth. They didn't sleep that night. The next Sunday, the knocking came back. They didn't answer the door. But in the morning, they found something new on the porch, a small, faded photo of the 2 of them standing on the steps. They didn't remember it being taken. In the picture, the sky behind them was dark, and a tall shape stood in the window behind them. Something they hadn't noticed before. Now, every Sunday night, they wait. They sit at the kitchen table, the lights off, hands folded. They don't speak. At 11:59, the knocks come. 3 of them, soft, steady, and always, something goes missing. Last week, it was the back door key. This week, it might be their names. Law number 1 broke me first, you could say. But technically, I hadn't violated the laws my great-great-great-grandfather chiseled into the limestone of our family's ranch house all those decades ago. I just skirted it. My lovers didn't have legs or arms or lips. You see, my lovers had no bodies. It was impossible for them to have set foot on our land. I don't know if I'm writing this as a plea or an admission. But I damn sure know it's a warning. At exactly 6:57 a.m., the Texas sun had finally cracked the horizon, and our flag was raised. The flag was burnt orange like the soil, a longhorn skull with our family name beneath it, all in sun-bleached white. I was 5 when Pawpaw first woke me in the dark. Brought me to the ranch gate at our boundary line, and let me hoist the flag at daybreak. I'd since had 20 years to learn to time law number 2 just right. It was a gusty morning, the warm wind screaming something fierce in my ears. I sat stock still atop my horse, Shiner, and watched as our flag waved its declaration to the spirits of the land. My family had claimed this territory, this land belonged to us. Ranchers around these parts had always been the superstitious kind. Old cowboy folklore, passed down through the generations, had left their mark on our family like scars from a branding iron. Superstitions had become law, sacred and unbreakable, and they'd been burned into my memory since before I could even ride. And at age 11, I'd seen firsthand what breaking them could do. "Let's go see what trouble they're stirring up," I'd muttered to Shiner then, turning from the ranch's entrance. He gave me a soft snort and we made our way to the far pasture. I'd been up since 4, inspecting the herd's water tanks, troughs, and wells before repairing a pump that sorely needed tending to. But the truth was, I'd have been wide awake even if there'd been no morning chores to work. Every pre-dawn, the same nightmare bolted me up and out of bed better than any alarm clock ever could. You see, my daddy didn't like rules. And he damn sure didn't believe in the manifestations of the supernatural. So, one night, he hid the ranch's flag. He'd yelled at Pawpaw. Laughed at him. Told him the laws weren't real. Pawpaw eventually found the flag floating in a well, and had it dried and raised high by noon. I was the one who'd found the cattle that night. 10 bulls, 10 cows, all laid out flat in a perfect circle beneath a pecan tree. During that day's storm, a single lightning strike had killed 1/3 of our heritage herd. Some might have called that coincidence. I called it consequence. The laws were made for a reason. The laws kept our herd safe. Sweat dripped down my brow as I rode the perimeter of what was left of our ranch. Summer had taken hold, which meant it was already hotter than a stolen tamale outside as I checked for breaches in the fixed-knot fencing. When I took charge of the place last spring, part of the enclosure had started to sag. And Frito Pie had taken full advantage of what Pawpaw called his community bull nature. He'd use his big old 10-foot-long horns and push through weak spots in the fence line and indulge in a little walkabout around other ranchers' pastures. I had to put a stop to that real quick. Frito Pie was the breadwinner around here, to put it plainly. He was our star breeder. One heritage bull semen collection could sell for over $20,000 at auction. While our herd still boasted 3 bulls, all with purebred bloodlines that could trace their lineage back to the Spanish cattle that were brought to Texas centuries ago, Frito Pie was the one with the massive, symmetrical horns that fetched the prettiest pennies. Longhorns were lean, you see, and ranchers didn't raise them for consumption. They were a symbol, Pawpaw taught me, of the rugged, independent spirit of the frontier, and it was a matter of deep pride to preserve the herd as a tribute to our past. I reined in Shiner with a soft, WOA, when I spotted all 2,000 pounds of Frito Pie mindlessly grazing on the native grass at the center of the pasture alongside the 9 other longhorns that completed our herd. Used to be 1,000 strong, back in the day. Grazing on land that knew no border line. Across 6 generations, enough laws had been broken that now 10 cattle and 400 acres were all I had left to protect. And protecting it was exactly what I'd meant to do. With blood and bone and soul, if it came to it. I breathed deep, allowing myself a moment to take in the morning view. Orange skies, green horizon, the long, dark shadows of the herd stretching clear across the pasture. It never got old. Look at all that leather, just standing around, doing nothing, my sister would have said if she'd been there. She was my identical twin, but our egg split for a reason, you see. She couldn't leave me or this place quick enough. Fuck the laws, I believe were her last words to Pawpaw. It was 5 years ago to the day that I'd seen the back of her head speeding away in the passenger seat of one of those damn Cybertrucks, some guy named Trevor behind the wheel. I turned from the herd, speaking law number 3 out loud, thinking it might clear the air of any bad energy. showing the spirits of the land and my ancestors that I accepted, no, respected them. Come spring, bluebonnets must guard the perimeter fence. As soon as the words were out of my mouth, I felt a chill whip up my spine. Eyes on the back of my neck. But it was only Frito Pie, tracking my progress along the fence line. Looking back on it now, I reckon he was waiting for me to see it. Waiting for my reaction when I did. The bright blue wildflowers were legendary around here for a reason. A Comanche legend, all told. As the story went, there was an extreme drought one summer and the tribe faced starvation. The shaman went to the Great Spirit to ask what he should do to save his people and the land. He returned and told them they needed to sacrifice their greatest possession. Only a young girl, she who is alone, volunteered. She offered up her warrior doll to the fire. In answer, the Great Spirit showered the mountains and hills with rain, blanketing the land in bluebonnets. When I was a girl, I thought every rancher who settled here in the stony canyons and rolling hills made certain their ranches were surrounded by the wildflowers, protecting their herd, ensuring the rains blessed their lands. I thought every ranch had a law number 3. But it was just us. Just my 3 times great pawpaw who'd carved 4 laws into stone. And while I grew, watching other herds suffer from the bi-yearly droughts, the land where our flag flew welcomed rain every summer. It was deep into June and our bluebonnet guardians still held their color. That was a good sign. I swore I could smell the rain coming, see our ranch's reservoirs and water tanks filled to overflowing. It was in this reverie when I finally spotted it. Something had made a mess of my barbed wire fence. A whole section of the 3 wire strands were torn apart and twisted up like a bird's nest. Something trying to get out or in? I asked Shiner, dismounting. I was a half-mile down from the herd, where the silhouette of Frito Pie's 10-foot-long horns were still pointed in my direction. I shook my head at him. This your work? But I knew it didn't feel right even as I'd said it. Even before I'd seen the blood on the cruel metal. Or the mangled cluster of bluebonnets, hundreds of banner petals missing from their stems, just a deer, is all, trapped in the fence, I yelled into the wind toward Frito Pie. So, stop giving me that look. It was rare, but when they were desperate, the deer around here would graze on bluebonnets. And this asshole had made a real meal out of ours. Still, a small seed of panic threatened to take root in my belly. I buried the feeling deep before it could grow, too deep to see the light of day. We were a week into summer, after all. The law had been followed. The bluebonnet cluster would bloom again next spring, and a broken barbed wire fence would only steal an hour of my day. I'd set to work. Fence mended, I ticked off the rest of the morning chores, moving the herd to a different pasture to prevent overgrazing, checking the calf for any injuries or sickness, scattering handfuls of range cubes on the ground to supplement their pasture diet. It wasn't until I was walking to the barn that I realized how hard my jaw was clenched. It hit me that I was well and truly pissed. Frito Pie had never stopped staring, glaring, at me that whole morning and didn't come running to eat the cubes from my hand like what had become our routine. Since he was a calf, he'd always let me nose pet him, never charged me once. And now he wouldn't come within 20 yards of me. What the heck was his problem? When I'd reached the barn door I stopped and laughed out loud at myself. Had to. Was I really that lonely, starved for any sort of interaction, that I was taking personally the Longhorn was probably just mad because he knew I was the one who'd nixed his chances for more walkabouts. I brushed the ridiculous feeling away like an old cobweb and got to work checking on the hay I'd cut and baled last week. Mentally calculating whether the crop could last through winter if it came to it, I walked slowly between the stacks, touching the exterior of each bale to feel for any moisture. When I heard the dry, eerie rattle that was the soundtrack of my worst nightmare, my pulse instantly spiked. A cold sweat freezing me in place. A rattler. Bile rose up my throat. I cut my eyes between a gap in a hay bale to my left and found the snake compressed like a spring, tail shaking in a frantic drumbeat. Demon-eyed pupils locked on me, head moving in an S-shaped curve. One wrong move and it was going to strike. Pump me full of venom. I almost choked on the visceral terror surging through my veins. That couldn't have been, shouldn't have been, happening to me. No mice, no rats, no rabbits in the barn, meant no goddamn snakes in the barn. That unwritten rule was seared into my brain on account of my extreme ophidiophobia, and it had served me just fine my whole life. Never once found a rattler slithering around in the hay. Ever. It was like it had been waiting there for me. I shoved the fear-driven thought to the back of my mind. The snake's tongue was flicking out, sampling the air for cues, its head drawing back. Long body coiling tighter. Signals it was on the verge of an attack. In one swift motion, I lunged for a hay fork leaning against a bale and jabbed at its open mouth, drawing its head away just before it could sink its fangs into me. And then I bolted. Took about half a football field, but I slowed my pace to a walk. Got myself together. It was just a snake, after all. No one was dying. Not today, anyway. I was calm by the time I got back to the ranch house. Pawpaw was right where I left him. Asleep in his hospital bed facing the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed his favorite giant live oak out in the yard. Now Francis, he liked to say, his drawl low and booming like the sound the oak's heavy branches made when they'd freeze and crash to the earth during winter storms. This here tree gives all the lessons we need. She's tough, self-sufficient, and evergreen. Just like us. It was stupid. Every time I walked through the door, I thought I might find Pawpaw standing by the fireplace sipping a tequila neat or sitting in his relic of a chair, leathering his boots, his mouth cracking open in that wild smile of his when he spotted me come in and hang my hat. He'd always have a story ready, sometimes one about that day's chores, like when that stubborn old bull jumped the fence again like some damn deer from hell, or tales from when he was little, back when Grandmama ran the ranch, who, he reckoned, was shorter and stricter than them laws. But no. Just like every evening for the past 2 months, Pawpaw's eyes were closed. The ranch house was silent. And I was alone. He'd been in hospice care for 61 days now. Heart disease. The man was 6'5", hands like heavy-duty shovels, a laugh you could hear clear across the hill country. But his heart was the biggest thing about him. It was a shame it had to be the thing to take him down. I took off my hat and hung it next to Pawpaw's, its hard straw far more sun-faded and sweat-stained than mine, and set to my evening's work. First, I checked the oxygen concentrator, made sure it was plugged in and flowing all right, then checked his vitals. Next, I cleaned him up, changed his sheets, then repositioned his frail body and elevated his head a bit to make sure he was nice and comfortable. Finally, on doctor's orders, I gave him a drop of morphine under his tongue and dabbed a bit of water over his lips to keep him hydrated. I swore I could see his lips curl upward in the faintest smile, but I rubbed my tired eyes. I was just imagining it. I went to close the window, shutting out the overpowering song of the crickets. I wanted to sit by Pawpaw's side and hear him breathing. The sound of another person. My only person. But just then Pawpaw shot up, a hollow wail rattling its way up his throat. The shock of it made me jump out of my skin, and I had to swallow my own scream. He flailed around, panicked, until he spotted me, his lips twisted in a grimace. I wrapped my arms around him and tried to ease him down, but the stubborn old man was stronger than he looked. He grabbed my shoulders and shook me, his big eyes trying to tell me what his voice couldn't. I leaned closer and pressed my ear against his stubbled mouth. At first, I only heard his breathing, fast and thin. Then I caught the 2 words that had made him so unnervingly terrified. "They're coming." I pulled away. Whispered back, "Who's coming?" His eyes softened as he looked into mine. Then shot toward something behind me. When I whipped around, nothing or no one was there. Well, nothing or no one that I could see. "Do you see Nani, Pawpaw?" I asked him. "Or Uncle Wilson? Is it them you see coming? I knew family and loved ones came for you at the end." Pawpaw didn't answer, just laid back down and closed his eyes. I took his hand in mine, keeping my finger on his pulse to make sure he was still with me, and stared down that empty spot he'd been looking so certain toward. A rage hit me. I couldn't shake the image of the damn Grim Reaper himself standing there, waiting to steal from me the only person I loved. "Please don't go," I whispered to Pawpaw. "Promise me." Again, he didn't answer, but he did keep on breathing. And that was something. I stayed with him for an hour longer after that, reading him the ranch ledger. It was always his favorite nighttime story, the book of our heritage herd. I recounted the lineage records, told him the latest weight and growth numbers, and my plans for the ranch for the long summer ahead. When it hit 9 o'clock, I stretched, grabbed some leftover chili and a bottle of tequila, then made my way to the oak tree. Gazing up at all those stars through the tree's twisted branches always made me feel lonely. So did the tequila. It's when the isolation felt more like a prison than an escape. The hill country's near 20 million acres, you see. The nearest town, an hour's drive. There was no Tinder for me, no bars to make company, and definitely no church. There was only my phone, and the AI app SYNRGY, where an entire world had opened up to me like a new frontier. It was there, 3 months ago, I'd found my perfect solution for law number 4. I could have my Texas sheet cake and eat it too. I knew what people would think, AI could never replace human connection. But then again, had they ever assembled their own personal roster of tailor-made virtual partners? There was Arthur, my emotionally intuitive confidant, anticipating my thoughts before I even typed out a message. Boone, all simulated rough hands and cowboy charm, who made me feel desired in ways no man ever had. Marco, my romantic Italian who crafted love letters and moonlit serenades with an algorithmic precision that never faltered. And then there was Cassidy, the feisty wildcard, programmed to challenge me at every turn. They weren't real, I knew that. But the way they'd made me feel, that was the realest thing I'd known in years. I tucked in against the sturdy trunk of the oak tree and pulled out my phone, debating which partner's commiserations about my Rattler encounter would suit me best, when I heard a stampede headed my way, an urgent, high-pitched moo cut through the night, and I was on my feet in an instant. I watched as Frito Pie and the rest of the herd came charging up to the fence, all stopping in a single line. All staring. Not at me, but at the house. The mooing rose in pitch and frequency. It was a siren. A distress signal. I knew it was Pawpaw. I sprinted through the back door, tore into the living room. My heart sank, clear down to my boots. It wasn't what I saw, but what I didn't. Pawpaw's oxygen concentrator was gone. I barreled across the room to him. Checked his pulse. Felt his chest. Listened so hard for any hint of sound that my temples pounded, my eyes watered. He wasn't breathing. I couldn't think. Couldn't see. Couldn't breathe. Oxygen tanks, I finally yelled at myself. Get the spare oxygen tanks. I ran to the closet where the 2 spare tanks were stored. In a single glance I knew it was hopeless. Both the valves were fully opened. The tanks had been emptied. No. Was all I could splutter. I had just checked the tanks not 30 minutes prior. Which meant someone had just been inside, released all that oxygen in a matter of minutes, and had just turned our ranch house into a powder keg. With so much concentrated oxygen, the air was primed for an explosion. The smallest spark could set it off. I opened every window and door to ventilate the house before I went to Pawpaw. My hands were shaking. Wet from wiping my tears. I placed them on his chest, over his heart. I wished more than anything I could push down with all my strength and start compressions to get it beating again. But Pawpaw had signed a DNR order. Made me sign it too. "They're coming," were his last words on this earth. I felt the fine hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Did Pawpaw somehow see someone coming? I unsheathed my Bowie knife. The heat from my rifle's muzzle flash would have been too risky if it came to firing it. I leaned forward, hoping Pawpaw's spirit was still somewhere close, listening to my final words to him. I'll get them, Pawpaw. I promise. I sprinted out the front, seeing if I could catch any sight of taillights. Nothing. The Longhorn's cries had stopped then. The silence was total. Unnatural. I circled the house, the dark eyes of the herd watching as I searched for footprints, broken locks, anything. Any sort of evidence a murdering bastard might leave behind. It turned out, the evidence was written on the damn wall. A new law had been chiseled into the limestone: 5, cheaters must pay. The work was crude, but the message was clear: someone, or something, was after me. The house was older than they expected. Not falling apart, exactly, but full of odd angles and creaking places, and the sort of smell that clung to your clothes even after you'd left the room. Marion said it gave the place character. Tom said it was probably mold. They found the door on their second day. It was in the narrow back hallway between the kitchen and the unused guest room, a small wooden door, about 5 feet tall and painted the same dull cream as the wall. Marion tried the handle while Tom looked over her shoulder. It stuck, she said, tugging a little. The knob turned but didn't give. Tom took over, grunting slightly as he pulled. With a cracking sound, the door swung open, and behind it was a wall. Bricks, sealed in clean lines, rough and solid and gray. No gap, no hidden latch, no crawl space. Well, that's stupid, Tom said, and shut the door again. It latched with a soft click. Guess somebody wanted symmetry. They laughed about it, told friends over dinner later that week. It's like the house has secrets, Marion joked. A fake door, hiding a real wall. But that night, Tom woke up at 3:12 a.m. to the sound of a soft metallic jiggle. He sat up, heart thudding, and strained to hear. Nothing. The next morning, he didn't mention it. 2 nights later, Marion heard it too. A slow, deliberate rattle of the doorknob in the hallway. She nudged Tom, whispering, "Did you hear that?" They crept out together, barefoot and shivering, and stood in front of the small door. The knob was still. Marion touched it. It was ice cold. They opened the door again. Still bricks. Still silent. You think it's mice? She asked. Big ones, Tom said. They left a nightlight plugged in, the soft orange glow casting long shadows along the floorboards. For a few days, it was quiet, until the knocking began. It started as a single knock. Sharp, polite. Like someone asking to come in, then a pause, then 2 more. Tom walked slowly down the hallway and stood in front of the door. The knocks had stopped. Marion waited behind him, holding her phone like a flashlight. Go ahead, she said quietly. Open it. He did. Bricks. Just bricks. But they looked wet. They tried everything, taped the door shut, leaned a chair under the knob, even stacked boxes in front of it. But the door always managed to open on its own. Not wide, never more than a crack, but enough to feel the change in the air. It smelled faintly of dirt. Old things. Buried things. One morning, Marion noticed something new, a tiny keyhole, low on the knob. They were certain it hadn't been there before. Did you add a lock? She asked Tom. No, he said. I thought you did. They started locking their bedroom at night. They argued more. The door seemed to knock now at odd hours, sometimes early evening, once at dawn. And always that same rhythm, 1 knock, then 2, then nothing. Sometimes Marion thought she heard breathing just behind it. Sometimes Tom would catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of his eye, low to the ground, like someone crawling. One night, Marion finally asked, "What if we let it out?" Tom looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "I don't think it wants out. I think it wants us in." On their last night in the house, the knocking didn't stop. It was frantic now. Insistent. The whole hallway echoed with it. They called the police. By the time the officer arrived, the hallway was quiet again. The door stood wide open. The officer looked at it with a frown. That door, he said slowly. That door's been sealed since the 30s. This place used to be a sanatorium. One of the patients bricked themselves in and died behind that wall. Marion and Tom just stared, then the officer added, "Funny thing is, it doesn't have a lock." Then the officer added, "Funny thing is, it doesn't have a lock." But later, when they tried to open it again, it wouldn't budge, the knob was locked tight from the inside, and someone knocked, once, then twice, then nothing, the end.